What's up, everybody? What's up, MGTOW? So this video is going to be a kind of review and look at Francis Bacon's book, A New Atlantis. Now, this book was written in the late 1500s, early 1600s, and basically Francis Bacon is known as the inventor of the scientific method. Now, this book could shed some light on some of the questions about the foundation of America, its purposes, or at least the purposes that the founders had for the foundation of the United States of America, including laws, some things about patriarchy, things about science, alternate Earth history, secret societies and spy agencies, globalism, socialism, monarchy, and a few other topics that he touches on in the book. Now, the book itself is kind of a utopian vision of what Francis Bacon wanted the New World, or America, to look like, and he influenced many other Enlightenment or Renaissance thinkers of the time and in the future. So let's take a look at Wikipedia and just find out a little bit of the history of who Francis Bacon was before I get into the book. Francis Bacon, 1st Viscount of St. Alban. He was born January 22nd, 1561, and died April 9th, 1626. He was an English philosopher and statesman who served as Attorney General and Lord Chancellor of England. His works are credited with developing the scientific method and remain influential throughout the scientific revolution. Bacon has been called the father of empiricism. His works argued for the possibility of scientific knowledge based only on inductive reasoning and careful observation of events in nature. Most importantly, he argued that this could be achieved by use of a skeptical and methodical approach whereby scientists aim to avoid misleading themselves. While his own practical ideas about such a method, the Baconian method, did not have a long-lasting influence, the general idea of the importance and possibility of skeptical methodology makes Bacon the father of the scientific method. This marked a new turn in the rhetorical and theoretical framework for science, the practical details of which are still central in debates about science and methodology today. In addition to his work in the sciences, Bacon was also a venerable patron of libraries and developed a functional system for the cataloging of books by dividing them into 3 categories: history, poetry, and philosophy, which could further be divided into more specific subjects and subheadings. Now, as far as his influence in North America, it says here, Bacon played a leading role in establishing the British colonies in North America, especially in Virginia, the Carolinas, and Newfoundland, in northeastern Canada. His government report on the Virginia colony was submitted in 1609. In 1610, Bacon and his associates received a charter from the king to form the Treasure and Company of Adventurers and Planters of the City of London and Bristol for the colony or plantation of Newfoundland, and sent John Guy to found a colony there. Thomas Jefferson, the 3rd President of the United States, wrote, "Bacon, Locke, and Newton. I consider them as the 3 greatest men that have ever lived, without any exception, and as having laid the foundation of the superstructures which have been raised in physical and moral sciences." Now, if you want to check out the full Wikipedia entry yourself, it goes on to talk about his influences on science and on the legal system, and he was pretty much against dictatorships, and he's trying to kind of push forth this idea of a scientific, not a scientific dictatorship, but a country where the laws are created by science and informed by religion. There's also a few scandals or conspiracies surrounding his life. One theory is that Bacon was part of a group of people who were the actual authors of the Shakespearean plays, and that Shakespeare wasn't actually a real person, but it was a pen name for an actual group of people that wrote the plays. But of course, since everything took place in secret, there's no real way to know if that's true or not. And it's also, in Wikipedia, it's saying that he had some connections to the Rosicrucians and Freemasons, but there's no evidence to support that he was in the Rosicrucians or the Freemasons. But then again, it was a secret society, so people doing stuff in secret typically don't leave evidence of what they're doing because that would be kind of pointless. And also, he lost his office as the Viscount or whatever because he was charged with being a homosexual, which, again, there's no evidence that he was a homosexual, but he was charged with being a homosexual by his enemies. So looking back in history, it kind of seems like calling somebody gay in the 1600s is very similar to Me Tooing somebody nowadays. Just a wild accusation that makes you lose your public status. So with that out of the way, we can actually look at the novel, The New Atlantis, which is supposedly a quote-unquote utopian vision of America, or the New Atlantis as he calls it. But even though it's said to be a utopian vision, we should keep in mind that he was, in some way, tangentially at least, connected with the Rosicrucians and Freemason secret societies, and he references many things or attributes that only somebody that was in a secret society would really know or understand about in the first place. So basically, to just give a brief overview of what the book is talking about, basically he is talking about a crew of sailors who sail past Peru to the west, passing China and going further north than China, and basically they ran out of supplies and they thought they were all going to die, and then they land on this mysterious island where there's already Christian people. But they're not regular Christians because they're wearing turbans and they have red crosses on their hats, which is definitely a reference to the Rosicrucians. And then further in the book, when they land, basically the place is set up as kind of a socialist utopia because they're telling him, you can stay here as long as you want, and basically everything's provided for you. As long as you're a Christian, you can come here. And then as they stay there, they learn some of the customs and traditions and secrets of this quote-unquote secret island that he's envisioning in his mind, which is called the island or land of Ben Salem, which I guess translated in Hebrew would mean the land of peace. And he's talking about how civil the people are and how everybody seems to be well educated, and there's a certain type of order to the place that he's in. And it kind of gives some insight into some of the questions that are still going on today, including immigration policy, the JQ, patriarchy theory, and a few other things. So I'm just going to read some quotes from the book in sections, and hopefully this can illuminate some aspects of what at least the founders of America thought that America should look like. Now, first off, the place that he goes to, he kind of describes where it is, but again, it's supposed to be a secret island that nobody knows about. And this kind of fits in with this new theory of alternate Earth history, where people are claiming that Tartary or Tartaria was an actual country. And in this book that was written in the 1600s, he references Tartaria as a place that existed. So you could take what you want from this paragraph or two, trying to kind of figure out where this island may or may not be that he's talking about. We sailed from Peru, where we had continued the space of 1 whole year, for China and Japan by the South Sea, taking with us victuals for 12 months, and had also good winds from the east, though soft and weak, for 5 months' space and more. But then the wind came about and settled in the west for many days, so we could make little or no way, and were sometimes in purpose to turn back. But then again there rose a strong and great winds from the south with a point east, which carried us up, for all that we could do, towards the north, by which time our victuals failed, though we had made good spare of them. So that finding ourselves in the midst of the great wilderness of waters in the world, without victual, we gave ourselves for lost men, and prepared for death. So then after that, they prayed to God to help them find land, and then they found some land, which was this place called Ben Salem. So in this next section, he's kind of talking about an alternate Earth history from the most popular modern version of history, which makes a lot of sense, because basically he's claiming that, most of the ancient cultures in the world had ships and could sail across both the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean, which makes sense because, the Egyptians and the Chinese had these huge ships, and most modern historians would have you believe that they never left their continent and sailed to the Americas. So what he's saying here is, men of confidence to adventure upon the waters, or what it was, but such is the truth. The Phoenicians, and especially Tyrians, had great fleets. So had the Carthaginians their colony, which is yet further west. Towards the east, the shipping of Egypt and of Palestina was likewise great. China also, and the great Atlantis, that you call America, which have now but junks and canoa, I guess he's talking about canoes, abounded them in tall ships. This island, as appeareth by faithful registers of those times, had then 1,500 strong ships of great content. Of all of this, there is with you sparing memory or none, but we have a large knowledge thereof. At that time, this land was known and frequented by ships and vessels of all the nations before named, and, as it cometh to pass, they had many times men of other countries that were no sailors that came with them, as Persians, Chaldeans, Arabians, so as almost all nations of might and fame resorted hither, of whom we have some strips and some little tribes with us at this day. And for our own ships, they went sundry voyages, as well to your straits, which you call the Pillars of Hercules, as to other parts of the Atlantic and Mediterranean Sea, as to Paven, which is the same with Cambaline, and Quincy upon the Oriental seas, as far as to the borders of East Tartary. Now, in the back in the notes of the book, it says that the borders of East Tartary, the eastern coast of Asia, north of China. So that's what they thought of Tartary in the 1600s, or at least this guy did. And when they're talking about the place that they're talking about that all these different countries sail to is the North American continent. So basically what he's saying is that the Great Flood or whatever caused people to stop sailing to North America and also destroyed all of the technology and culture that existed in North America, which kind of follows with the Atlantean story. So here he's talking about immigration policy for the most part, and he's comparing the immigration policy of this new Atlantis place with that of China, which he says, "So it is not in China, for the Chinese sail where they will or can, which showeth that their law of keeping out strangers is a law of pusillanimity, which is a law of pusillanimity and fear. But this restraint of ours hath only one exception, which is admirable, preserving the good which cometh by communicating with strangers and avoiding the hurt. And I will now open it to you." Alright, so this is where the kind of like Freemasonic stuff comes in, or the Rosicrucian stuff, with the whole secret societies and kind of their goals, or the goals of these people in the new Atlantis that already exist. So he says here, "It was the erection and institution of an order or society which we call Solomon's house, the noblest foundation, as we think, that ever was upon the earth, and the lanthorn of this kingdom. It is dedicated to the study of works and creatures of God. Some think it beareth the founder's name a little corrupted, as if it should be Salomona's house. But the records write it as if spoken. So as I take it to be denominate of the King of the Hebrews, which is famous with you, and no stranger to us. For we have some parts of his work, which with you are lost, namely that natural history which he wrote of all plants from the cedar of Libanius to the moss that groweth out of the wall, and of all things that have life and motion. This maketh me think that our king, finding himself to symbolize in many things with that of the King of the Hebrews, which lived many years before him, honored him with the title of this foundation. And I am rather induced to be of this opinion, for I find in the ancient records this order or society is sometimes called Solomon's house, and sometimes the College of the 6 days' work, whereby I am satisfied that our excellent king has learned from the Hebrews." So then, even though earlier in the book he tells his men that they should be on their best behavior and act like Christians because it's a Christian place, and the only reason why they let them onto the island in the first place and saved them from starving to death was because they were Christians. Then they were put into quarantine for 3 days, and all the people that had scurvy were given lemons and some type of pill, and they got better. And then after they got better, they were allowed to leave the quarantine area, and then he runs into a Jewish guy who he talks to for some time about some of the traditions and things on the island. So what he says here is, "By that time, 6 or 7 days were spent. I was fallen into straight acquaintance with a merchant of the city whose name was Joabin. He was a Jew and circumcised, for they have some few strips of Jews yet remaining among them, whom they leave to their own religion, which they may be better do, because they are of a far differing disposition from the Jews in other parts. For whereas the Jews in the other parts, they hate the name of Christ, and they have a secret, inbred rancor against the people amongst whom they live. These, contrariwise, these Jews that they live with, give unto our Savior many high attributes and love the nation of Ben Salem extremely." So, again, he's referencing what's supposed to be America and saying that, yeah, there's some Jewish people that live here, but they're not the same as the normal Jews. They're Jews, but they're not the same as the Jews that you think about when you're talking about Jewish people, which is kind of interesting because that's kind of how the Jewish people are in the United States. They're not really Arabic, or I guess what you would say from the Middle East. They're European Jews, for the most part. So down further a little bit, he says, "Yet they are far from the language of other Jews. And for the country of Ben Salem, this man would make no end of commending it, being desirous by tradition amongst the Jews there to have it believed that the people thereof were of the generations of Abraham by another son, who they called Noachran, and that Moses, by a secret Kabbalah, ordained the laws of Ben Salem, which they now use, and that when the Messiah should come and sit in his throne at the Heru Salem, the king of Ben Salem should sit at his feet." So that's a little interesting passage right there, where he's saying that, and that Moses, by a secret Kabbalah, ordained the laws of Ben Salem, which they now use. So he's saying that the laws of America are actually the laws of the Jewish people and of the Kabbalah, not of Christianity, which is an interesting side note when you're talking about the JQ and its influence in United States politics. Now, further on in the story, he talks to the Jewish guy for a little while, and then a guy shows up on the island from the House of Solomon, which, that's basically the Masons, if you haven't picked up on this already, because the Masons, that's their big guy, is King Solomon from the Bible, that they kind of respect and revere. And so the House of Solomon could be seen as the House of the Masons. But anyway, so this Masonic guy, or this guy from the House of Solomon, shows up on the island, and basically everybody's in awe that a guy from the House of Solomon even showed up at the island, because it's been 12 years since the last time they even saw a guy from the House of Solomon. And then when he shows up, the Jewish guy's got to go. He's like, I got to go talk to this guy from the House of Solomon, because that's kind of my job, is to entertain people from the House of Solomon. And then he tells whoever the guy's supposed to be in this book, I'm not sure if it's supposed to be Francis Bacon or somebody else, but he tells the protagonist of the story that he's going to try to set up a meeting with him and the guy from the House of Solomon. And then when he comes back, he goes and meets with the guy, and then he comes back and he says this to the protagonist. 3 days after, the Jew came to me again and said, Ye are happy men, for the father of Solomon's house taketh knowledge of you being here, and commandeth me to tell you that he will admit all your company to his presence, and have private conference with one of you that ye shall choose. And for this hath appointed the next day after tomorrow. And because he meaneth to give you his blessing, he hath appointed it in the forenoon. So then, they go and meet with the guy that's, the head of the House of Solomon, and he sits down with the one guy, and the guy from the House of Solomon speaks Spanish. And then basically he's going to tell this guy the secrets of the House of Solomon. So this is what the guy says about the House of Solomon, or the guy from the House of Solomon says. First, I will set forth unto you the ends of our foundation. Secondly, the preparations and instruments we have for our works. Thirdly, the several employments and functions whitherto our fellows are assigned. And fourthly, the ordinance and rites which we observe. The end of our foundation is the knowledge of causes and the secret motions of things, and the enlarging of the bounds of the human empire to the effecting of all things possible. Now, he goes on to describe a bunch of different things, basically that, the House of Solomon has secret caves buried underneath mounds where they mine metals and create artificial metals, and hermits live there. And then they have burial chambers and food storage chambers that are buried underground. They also have towers and other type of stuff. And then he's talking about where they do experiments on animals. And in fact, Francis Bacon died from pneumonia because he was doing experiments on trying to preserve meat in the cold. And then, he's saying that they have springs and wells with water that makes people feel healthy. And he's talking about how they have basically, all types of different plants and things that they've mixed together, kind of alluding to genetic modification, but more just, grafting different plants and things together. And then, of course, they have bake houses and brew houses and bread makers and all types of stuff that people like, which, it does kind of seem as if this is kind of the vision of America, of consumerism, that they're going to be able to make any product or anything that will satisfy the needs of man. Like they've got engine houses and furnaces and mechanical arts and the best arts, and he's even saying that they have places where they can reproduce your voice, which is like alluding to recording and stuff like that. So this part is also kind of interesting because when he's talking about the organization of this place, and this guy is basically telling him how he should organize this country or how they organize their country, and that he should follow suit if he wants to be as great and marvelous and wonderful as this country of Ben Salem. And then he talks about employing spies, which is kind of, again, alluding to this whole secret society thing and the fact that they don't really believe in egalitarianism. At least he doesn't. Maybe some of the people that he influenced, like Locke and some other people, do believe in egalitarianism, but he doesn't, because he's describing a strict hierarchy of people that study the sciences and have different levels and degrees of knowledge. But anyway, what he says here is, for the several employments and offices of our fellows, we have 12 that sail into the foreign countries, under the names of other nations, for our own we conceal, who bring us the books, abstracts, and patterns of experiments of all other parts. These we call merchants of light. So it's just kind of interesting that, this place is supposed to be Christian or religious, but yet it's a hidden, secret place that's ruled by the laws of Jewish people and controlled by the House of Solomon. And they have 12 guys that sail to other countries under the name of other nations because they hide the name of their own nation, and then they collect all the information from the other countries and bring it back to their country and then use it for themselves. And then he describes like a full hierarchy, well, basically saying that, he has the people that go out and get the information, then people that do the experiments, then there's people that look at the experiments and divide the experiments up into useful things, and then the last people look at all the experiments and things and turn them into axioms and aphorisms that you can use to interpret nature. So he doesn't believe in egalitarianism, but he does believe in secret societies, in which he says right here, we have consultations which of the inventions and experiences we have discovered shall be published and which not, and take all an oath of secrecy for the concealing of those which we think fit to keep secret, though some of those we do reveal sometimes to the state and some not. So again, he's reiterating this fact that there's a secret class of ruling scientists, basically, that experiment on everyone and everything, and then they keep all the information of the experiments secret to themselves and only dole out what they feel that they should. Instead of sharing all the information with everybody, they've kind of placed themselves as a class above everybody else who's entitled to know everything from the experiments that other people are doing in the methods and techniques and traditions of other cultures, while secretly sneaking into their country, pretending to be other people from other countries, taking the information back to their nation, and then concealing the information and swearing an oath of secrecy that they're not going to release the information that they've taken from the other people. It kind of sounds a lot like secret societies and the fact that this country was kind of set up to have a plutocracy, where, I mean, Pluto is supposed to be the hidden planet, so basically a plutocracy is that you're ruled by a hidden class of people, instead of an oligopoly where you're just ruled by the rich people, or hegemony where you're ruled by a small minority group of people. It's a plutocracy because there's a hidden hand. And Edward Bernays also refers to the hidden hand in his work, and a few other kind of big name social engineers refer to, the hidden hand or the secret societies that actually control what's going on. And they just happen to work within this House of Solomon and Freemasons and Rosicrucians, and they're supposed to be Christians, but they say they're Christians because, like, in the beginning of the book, when they show up, even though they say they're Christians, there's some question as to whether or not they are Christians, because he's telling his men, he's like, well, we're here now and these people are Christians, and you guys got to stop acting like sailors and start acting like Christians so they don't kick us out of here, which is just interesting in itself. And then, going along with, him being accused of homosexuality, which may or may not be true, because it might just been him getting Me Too'd, but there's definitely a lot of secrecy and hierarchy going on within this book. Okay, so again, he's kind of talking about the spies here, or whatever they're calling them, the guys that go out and pretend to be other people and go into other people's countries and find out the information. I don't know what else you would describe them as, but spies. So he says that every 12 years there should be set forth out of this kingdom 2 ships, appointed to several of these ships there should be a mission of 3 of the fellows or brethren of Solomon's house, whose errand was only to give us knowledge of the affairs and state of those countries to which they were designed, and especially of the sciences, arts, manufactures, and inventions of all the world, and withal to bring unto us books, instruments, patterns, and every kind, that the ships, after they have landed, the brethren should return, and that the brethren should stay abroad till the new mission. So basically what he's saying here is that they're not going to these other countries to get gold and silver and stuff like that, because what he says right here is, but thus you see, we maintain a trade, not for gold, silver, or jewels, nor for silks, nor for spices, nor any other commodity of matter, but only for God's first creature, which was light. To have light, I say, of the growth of all parts of the world. So, they're spies. Their only mission is to get information, to get light, to be enlightened of all the world. So these people are a people that live in some random hidden place and they send spies out all over the world to find out what everybody else in the world is doing and bring it back, that sounds a lot like globalism, because they live in a socialist country, basically where everybody has everything provided for them, and they're super rich, and nobody knows where they are, but they know where everybody else is, and they send out their people to find out information about other countries and probably do some other stuff too. Now, this last part that I'm going to talk about is where he's kind of describing a patriarchal society for sure, because he describes a feast that they have in which only a man who has lived to see 30 persons descended of his body alive together and all above 3 years old to come to this feast at the cost of the state. So you can see again that this place is socialist or has some socialist implications, because the state is paying a man who's had basically 30 descendants that are all above 3 years old and 33. The father of the family, who they call the Tirsan, goes to this feast, and then all of the family members gather around him, and they're all given some type of reward for being a part of this large family that's descended from this man. So it's a patrilineal society or patriarchal society. He's not envisioning a matriarchal society. Then to add some more evidence that he envisions a patriarchal or patrilineal society is here. He says, "The Tirsan cometh forth with all his generations or lineage, the males before him and the females following him. And if there be a mother from whose body the whole lineage is descended, there is a traverse placed in a loft above on the right hand of the chair, with a privy door and a carved window of glass leaded with gold and blue, where she sitteth but is not seen." So again, he's saying that the males should be in front of the man and the females should be behind the patriarch. And if there's a mother, she's not being honored at this feast or ceremony, but she is able to sit in a loft above where she's not seen. So to me, that looks a lot like patriarchy to me. It doesn't look like they're celebrating the feminine, they're celebrating the masculine. And also he has some notes on how politicians should act. And he's against people taking bribes or taking, I guess, what would be lobbying money. Because he says here, "So he left us. And when we offered him some pistolets, he, smiling, said, he must not be twice paid for one labor," meaning, as I take it, that he had salary sufficient of the state for his services. For, as I after learn, they call an officer that taketh rewards twice paid. And from the fact that you can see that the guy turned down being twice paid, it seems that that's a negative thing, that you don't want to be considered an officer that's twice paid. Then if you're getting paid by the state, basically you're a politician, then you should not be taking rewards from another person. You should not be taking bribes. You shouldn't be taking lobbying money. You work for the state. And we can see that we've definitely come far from that. We've also come far from this patrilineal vision that he's had. And the secret society scientific stuff, we've kept that though. Interesting. So here in the introduction, it's kind of talking about how because King James I died before he had a chance to enact Francis Bacon's vision for this invisible college that would be full of these spies that would go all around the world and basically take the knowledge and information from every country and bring it back to the invisible college. It was later formed, starting in 1645, commonly known as the Invisible College. In 1648, some of its members, joined by others, began to assemble at Oxford. At the Restoration, it became possible for these pioneers to form the Society for the Advancement of Experimental Philosophy, to which Crowley dedicated his proposition. The society was formally incorporated in 1662 as the Royal Society of London for Improving Natural Knowledge. Among its original members were Petty, Crowley, and Evelyn. And then further down, it says that in the dedication of this new Sepsis Scientifica in 1665, Solomon's house in the New Atlantis was a prophetic scheme of the Royal Society. So there's a lot of conspiracies surrounding the Royal Society, Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, those type of concepts. And the fact that Francis Bacon is known as the predecessor or the main person that envisioned something like the Royal Society, it's very interesting to see that his vision definitely includes some Freemasonic, secret society, spycraft type of views of the world, and also a strict plutocracy with a scientific kind of secret scientific dictatorship in which there's a class of people that's elected to become part of this Solomon's house thing. I mean, if you don't get the Masonic reference by now, you're probably never going to get it. And that these people were charged with kind of being ahead of everybody else in knowledge and information, and that knowledge and information was to be doled out to the public as they saw fit, even though they were sneaking into other people's countries, pretending to be from another country than the country that they were in, and then taking their books and their knowledge and learning how to use all their stuff, and then bringing it back to this invisible college, the Royal Society in London. So you can see why people could be kind of suspicious of something like this. Because, I mean, if your intentions are truly good, why do you have to hide what you're doing? Why do you have to create an invisible college in order to be a part of Solomon's house and create a country that's ruled by the Kabbalah that Moses handed down, even though it's supposed to be a Christian country, and guys wearing turbans with red crosses are a part of it? It's just really interesting. And if you just look at it as a fantasy, utopian kind of thing, it's one thing. But if you actually study Freemasonic history and alternate Earth history, and there's definitely some interesting references to the JQ in here, I mean, it's kind of hard to just brush this aside as the ramblings of a raving madman. I mean, the fact that this guy is known as the father of empirical science, the founder of the Royal Society of England, the founder of the first British colonies in the United States, to say that this guy is nuts and he's just making this all up, even though the Freemasons existed in Europe documentedly at least in the 1300s, if not earlier than that, then it starts to paint a completely different picture than this just being some made up thing that some crazy guy made up. So, in any case, I'll put some links down below to Francis Bacon and stuff like that, but as far as this goes, it just goes to show that there was a lot of forethought put into the creation of the United States. And it wasn't just a bunch of random people sailing across the ocean and stumbling upon the United States. Because as we can see, he's saying that they knew that the earth was round way before people said that it was. And that Chinese people and Egyptian people and Japanese people and Phoenicians were sailing to the United States way before the official history says that it was. And there is alternate history evidence that's not taught in schools that does pretty much point to the fact that this is true. That there were people sailing to the United States and that there was a civilization in the United States that had a higher level of technology than what we traditionally know the Native Americans to have had. And, taking that into account, it really kind of makes you wonder how far advanced these people have been and for how long. If you're taking into account that even a small sliver of what this book is talking about is true, and that he didn't just make all this up on a whim. So with that, I'm going to get out of here. So have a good day and go MGTOW.